Welcome to A Cup of Tea, where we are interested in how academic research can change the world for the better. I'm here with Professor Dame Henrietta Moore. You're the founding director of the Centre for Global Prosperity.
Yep.
We've got 10 questions, which we want to understand about you, your research, and what's happening to the world of research generally.
Right.
So the first one is, it's a cup of tea, which is a global commodity and a British tradition. You have chosen...
something with lemon. Might be Earl Grey.
Might be Earl Grey. Any particular reason why that's your chosen tea tipple?
I don't like tea with milk.
Good reason.
Good reason. And not necessary. Ruins a good cup of tea. Yeah.
It's always polarising, isn't it?
It's always polarising, absolutely.
So the first question about research for you then is, if you had £1 million to personally spend on a research project, what would it be? How would you spend it?
Well, if I had £1 million right now, I think what I'd be doing is choosing one particular part of the UK and getting together these big transdisciplinary teams that I work with and working out why it's so impossible for the government to get all the relevant bits moving at the same time in the right direction to improve the quality of people's lives. It's actually not that difficult, but it does require local coordination, and that's the thing that governments are not very good at.
So when you're talking about coordination, the coordination of what bits?
If you can imagine the kind of thing that governments normally do with traffic, this gives you a good idea of why they can't run the economy, okay? So they decide that they're going to introduce a low-traffic neighbourhood. So they introduce a low-traffic neighbourhood, and then the traffic goes somewhere else. So that causes another problem. So then they try and fix that problem. And then that causes a traffic jam on the local roundabout. So then they try to fix roundabouts. And by the time they've done all of that, they've either run out of money or they've been voted out of office by everybody, and everyone is still stuck in a traffic jam. So that's a bit like how the economy runs. So if you wanted, for example, to have distributed new green energy systems, then you would need to have a workforce who could support those distributed green energy systems. So you would need to train them to do it. Instead of which, you say to people, we're going to have green distributed energy systems. We're going to bring in this wonderful high tech from outside the region with lots of outside workers, and they're going to create these new energy systems. At which point, everybody inside the area who's already been living there says, well, we don't have a job. So we don't like green energy, and we don't want green energy. So then we go around in circles. So this is the kind of problem that goes on all the time. So actually, we have in the United Kingdom large numbers of people of working age who are not working and not seeking any work. Most of those people are classified in one way or another as unable to work, so unwell. And so in that situation, if you're going to create lots and lots of new jobs for people, you've also got to do something about people's health. And if you're going to do something about their mental health, you probably have to do something about the structures that are sustaining them. So as you can see, there are a lot of moving parts. And most of the time, though, it gets absolutely impossible for the structures of government to deliver on those kinds of things. So an alternative way of doing it is you actually go to the local area itself. You say, okay, so you're all living here. What needs to be done? Which is what we often do in the Institute. So we very, very rarely come with a blueprint or an idea from outside. We always start with what's going on at the local level.
So as somebody with a background in economics, all that literature on the fundamental problems of coordination, we can kind of, you were saying, don't get too bound into that, concentrate on what's happening on the ground and look for the answers there. And that's where the money would go to.
Indeed. And if you're an economist, what we would say is don't worry about macroeconomics, although that's important and they need to be got right. And don't fiddle about with microeconomics and household stuff too much. Fiddle around in the area that I now call meso, so the bit in between, the middle, the bit where the microeconomics meets the macroeconomics, the bit that people actually have to live in their everyday lives, the way we all live lives, very messy. And we have to remember that in the UK today, 1 in 5 adults lives in poverty, 1 in 3 children lives in poverty. That's 30% of all the children of the UK in the 21st century. That's a scandalous number of young people. And that's the kind of thing that motivates me.
Wow.
That's why I do the job.
So on this project, this £1 million project, do you have a particular hypothesis about one thing that could make a difference? I'm particularly thinking about transport.
If you look at the UK overall, we're one of the most unequal countries in the developed world. And so the disparities regionally are very, very large. And those disparities we have tried to tackle over decades and decades, since at least the 1970s. We've spent a lot of money on the so-called left-behind areas of the United Kingdom. And the result is that we've moved the dial relatively little.
Yeah.
And that's because there are structural problems which are common to all these areas, and then there are very specific local problems. So if government policies are all about, growth, 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 and if growth is just about what kind of industries can we get into those areas, even if you got all those industries into those areas and did all those things, you probably wouldn't be moving the dial as much as you should. And one of the things that economics recognizes very well, and in fact, if you talk to almost any economist, and I'm sure it would be true if I asked you this question, if I say to you, why is productivity so dismally low in the UK? You'll come up with lots and lots of structural features, but one of the things you're going to mention to me eventually when you run out of things to say is you're going to say, well, there is this problem of something called culture. And so you have to understand how things are actually working in the local area. And if you want to make them work well, you need to work with organizations. What are the major blocks? And start with those, because as soon as you release those, you get a set of cascading benefits.
So this is great practical local stuff.
Yeah.
So you're in this field of prosperity, studies, global prosperity. Yep. Tell us about how you got into the field.
Well, I got into the field because I was sitting in the William Wise Chair at Cambridge doing anthropology, and I suddenly thought, really, I should be doing something a little bit different. Because I'd already, written a lot of books, and I'd already taught a lot of people anthropology, and I'd already given lots of advice about anthropology. And I thought, actually, the quality of people's lives around the world, given that we're entering the 21st century, is not really going in the right direction. And UCL, being very forward-looking, asked me if I'd like to come and do something about that at UCL. So I said yes. So that was the origins of the institute.
What's the most common misconception about interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary work in that field that you would like to dispel, if you could?
Well, I think the most common misunderstanding, in a way, is that all you need to do is to get a lot of very clever people together, and then the answer will be solved.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not like that at all, because the first problem is they all think they're working on a different problem. So the first thing you have to do is to get the team to come together to work out what it is that they can really do with each other. And that's about the way that certain kinds of thinking sparks other kinds of thinking. So you're passing the baton backwards and forwards. And that's what really works. And once you get it working, people are very excited about it because it's enormously productive. Because it turns out that when you get large numbers of people together, you get different ideas in the room. And when you get different ideas in the room, you get different perspectives. And when you have different perspectives, you have different solutions.
This is so exciting. I love the idea of getting people to work together, interdisciplinaries to work together well. But maybe you can tell me about how that's working on something you're working on at the moment. What's a current project, and who have you got involved? And what are the sort of barriers to making it happen?
So the first thing to say is that you can't just sit in London being the Institute for Global Prosperity. We have large numbers of intellectual collaborations, and so we have a base in Nairobi and we have a base in Beirut. So we run out of the Middle East and we run out of Africa. And those collaborations are responsible for delivering on certain kinds of areas. So the work that goes on in the Middle East focuses on what is prosperity in the age of mass displacement. And in Africa, those teams work primarily on what is happening with environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and food security. And here in the UK, we work on inequality and the functioning of the state. So that doesn't mean that the problems that you get in all those areas are not going on everywhere. They are. But what it means is that you don't have all the theoretical work led from London and it just goes out to other parts of the world as if this was a sort of development project. It doesn't work like that. You need to have people who are coming together specifically with different ideas and different solutions, because I'm passionately committed to the idea that many of the solutions we have to some of our contemporary problems will come from the global south. And that's because they're on the sharp end of all kinds of challenges, and because they are not already embedded in a series of structures or frameworks which they find impossible to shift.
So the next question, I'm dying to hear what this is, bearing in mind the breadth of what we've just heard, which is, what's the scariest thing you've ever had to do as a researcher?
Oh, well, that probably goes back to something way, way back in the earlier years of my research. That would be driving up a very, very steep and wildly unmade road late at night with someone seriously injured in the back when you're a long way from any kind of medical care. That's probably the scariest thing, because the road's only as wide as the Land Rover. So, and you can't see over the bonnet because it's so steep. So, and it's dark.
That's out in the field, yeah.
That's out in the field, yes. So if those kind of scary things, but then there are a lot of other scary things that you can do. I mean, it's quite scary being in these very complex situations where you can always, with research, potentially do a lot of harm. You have to be very careful what you're doing.
Yeah.
And, you have to work very, very closely with very experienced local academics. And you can only do it if you're all working together as a team, and that you take it very seriously, what you're trying to do. Yeah. And it can go, yes. All the teams in the Institute have what we call citizen scientists working on the teams. So these are people we train from the local residents to be part of the science teams. And those people are working alongside the main science teams. So one of the things that I think UCL has done, which is most impressive, is that because of the work that we were doing, UCL agreed to set up the UCL Citizen Science Academy. So we now train these people, but much more importantly, the university accredits them.
Yeah.
So I have accredited citizen scientists, many of whom have not finished school, many of whom have not even been to school, who are working in Lebanon and in Africa on these projects. And of course, we have many, many, many in the UK and in London and so on.
I want to go, everybody, definition of research impact, that's it, okay? We've just seen the apogee, do you know what I mean? This is wonderful, thank you. So, is there a researcher or an author in your field or in another who you find inspiring and who you'll go and read?
Oh yes, there are a huge number of those. I mean, it would be very difficult to...
Is there a favourite?
...say, but I mean, I think the important thing is about how you learn to think, which is something you need to do when you're a very junior academic, and which you don't learn, actually, I have to say, by taking an undergraduate degree, and not even by taking a master's degree, because thinking is about how you proceed. So a lot of people think that what you have to do with research is you have your theory, and then you go out and you collect your data, and then you sort of decide, how does it work, kind of thing. They're really good researchers. So I'm thinking of the woman who was the William Wise Chair before me, who's called Marilyn Strathern, who's an anthropologist. And what you notice with people who are very, very able in their field is that it's not so much they're asking themselves, how does the theory work with the data that I've collected? But they're asking themselves, what are the pre-theoretical assumptions in the theory that I'm using, which may or may not withstand the test of time?
Yeah. Where's the paradigm, and where, which bits of it are beginning to...
What is the framework? What is the concept? And how being attached to those things prevents you from being innovative. And it also prevents you from hearing other academics and other disciplines, because you can't see it from their point of view. Right? So there's a little bit of serendipity in these things. So when you work with someone as gifted as Marilyn Strathern, whom I've known for many decades, so you see her making that move, you realise, you realise when she's got to a certain point in the argument, and then she suddenly says, but of course, that isn't the way to look at it. The way to look at it is this way. And then, and that's how you learn to think. But thinking is really made up of a lot of different kinds of things.
For anyone starting a PhD, I hope they get, please look at this. No, it's vital. Thank you. There's so much in what you're doing.
Yeah.
But if we were to ask you, what are the 3 significant problems, just 3, that your research can make a positive contribution to in terms of making the world better?
Okay, well, if you had to choose 3, and let's just say we're talking about the United Kingdom at the moment.
Let's go with it, yeah.
I would say housing.
Yeah.
People just do not have adequate housing. The housing is a walking disaster, just because most of our houses are not even remotely future-proof. Yeah. So imagine the mess we're in now. Imagine the mess we're going to be in 30 years' time when we haven't done any more investment than we've already done. So housing. Yeah. The other thing that's a problem is that we are just walking into a storm around food, because we are not dealing with some of the challenges here. So we're a small island. There's a big pressure for carbon net zero, which I approve of, but a lot of that is being done through things like rewilding, taking land out of production, and so on. So we've got a crisis in farmer livelihoods. We've got lots of people who are living in food deserts in the cities. So they're eating terrible stuff. We're allowing our supermarkets to dominate the price at the farm gate. I mean, that is such a terrible mess, the food system. And of course, we will always have to bring in food. And then I think the other one is we need a new kind of social contract for the younger generation. Because at the moment, the younger generation are really struggling with a lot of disadvantages. But also there's a lot of populist fueling of unnecessary divisions between the generations around the fact that somehow the other generation has eaten everything and left nothing for them on the table. That isn't actually, strictly speaking, true. And so that needs to be negotiated, but it will need to be negotiated through a rethink of how we are all working together to ensure their future. And
housing, food, intergenerational equality.
Justice.
Yeah, justice.
Yeah,
okay.
Justice, yeah.
So is artificial intelligence going to steal your job, or is it going to transform your job?
Well, it depends what you mean by artificial intelligence. So again, we do quite a lot of work in the IGP on artificial intelligence for social purpose.
Yeah.
And we are all used to scaremongering around AI. So, it's bad for children's brains. It's ruining everybody's sex life. It's, causing terrible problems in school. It's causing the rise of populist nationalism. It's doing all kinds of things, right? But the reality is that ordinary language models are trained on what we've got out there. And so if you're really dealing with a problem that you haven't seen before, AI is most unlikely to be very helpful with it, especially if it's a social problem, because there's nothing out there, so we haven't trained it. So as we go on now to think about whether there will be something called general intelligence, then that's another matter. But what most of us who use AI a bit, because we all have to, because we have to know what we're doing, and notice is that if you ask AI a very simple question, from a research point of view, say, can you tell me about all the Gen Z protests that have taken place in Africa in the last 5 years? Just provide the references, right? So on the first run, you will get most of what you might have got if you'd spent 25 minutes on the internet, and it does it in like 4. Okay, so that looks good. If you say, I don't really think you've got the right answer here, what I wanted was X, and ask another question, you might get a refinement, but you also might get a lie. Mm. And you also might get data that's absolutely nothing to do with Africa, which is not a mistake that I would make if I was looking at it myself. So by this time, I've answered a question, it took 4 minutes, and it took 2 minutes for the next one after that, and 3 minutes. So we're kind of heading up to 10, and I could probably do it myself in 22, but I wouldn't make any errors.
Yes.
Right? So it depends on what you want it to do, I think. Yeah. And then the thing about going to interview old ladies in Land Rovers in the middle of the night in Kenya, don't think it does that well. But it will do maybe when it becomes general intelligence. Perhaps it'll drive the Land Rover in.
Perhaps it'll drive. Why does it lie?
When you ask it a question, the first thing that it will do, if you don't like the answer, is it will expand its reach and start pulling in stuff that's not relevant. So then it becomes an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And then once it's an exaggeration, when you ask it to go down further, it will just keep producing stuff that it'll think will satisfy you. Yes. So basically it starts fibbing. So yes, of course, it's going to transform all our lives, but I think at the moment, the kind of debate that we're having about it is rather scaremongering, it's a little bit belligerent, and it's not focusing on what we could do with it. It's focusing on what it's doing to us, which seems to me to be a very impoverished way of approaching it. If you're going to carry on thinking about AI as if it were a form of coal or oil that you're extracting out of the system all the time.
But that's a view of productivity.
It is.
That's the current paradigm sees productivity about squeezing things from things.
Pips of things. And this is very popular.
About extraction.
This is very popular at the moment, which is why we spend a lot of time in the Institute talking about, what is prosperity for the 21st century, new economic model for the 21st century. Because everybody knows that, once you've squeezed all the juice out of the lemon, there comes a point when there isn't any more juice in it.
That leads us on to sort of hopes and fears. My sort of question is, what's the shift that needs to happen? And then I'm going to ask you about what are your hopes and fears? What are your hopes for academic research and what are your fears?
Well, the issue is that productivity growth over the last, say, 15 years in the United Kingdom has been about half that in the United States. Neither of them have had huge productivity growth. Ours is also lower than France and Germany, which is more concerning because they're our neighbours and they're right next door. So if our productivity growth had been that of France and Germany in the last 15 years, people would be significantly better off.
25%.
Exactly.
Yes.
I know. Significantly better off than they currently are. Now, why not? And the answer is because we've not invested. We've not invested in our infrastructure. We've not invested in our technology. We've not invested in our people. If you've got a third of your children are poor, what do you think they're going to do at school? So one of the things I think that, if we're going to talk about hopes and fears, is that we need to make sure that our universities are focusing on the issues that we're actually all facing and not allow those issues to be politicized. And this kind of constant politicization of things, which we need to have as shared assets between us, is very poor politics because it's very short term. It's not future proof.
Because it leads us to fund the wrong sort of research, the wrong sort of questions.
Wrong sort of questions. You need to be very careful with research because research does not function well in those kinds of environments. So we have to remember what universities are for.
You've helped us understand that. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed a cup of tea.
I enjoyed my tea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.